Thank you. I think we're set. My name is Indra Frank. I have the privilege of serving as the Environmental Health Director for the Hoosier Environmental Council. I wanted to make a couple of announcements as we're getting resettled. One is, remember that there are hashtags for the discussion topics that we're talking about, and they're on the card that should be located in the center of your table. Speaking of the center of the table, don't forget that we have a stamped envelope and card for you to take action today on the issues that really speak to you as far as writing to your elected officials. Let's see, I also wanted to put out a call for anyone who needed continuing education credits today. We do have pre-approval for 4 continuing education hours with the National Environmental Health Association, so any environmental health or public health professionals who could use those continuing ed credits. Just make sure that you see me afterwards so that we can get your form signed. We will take questions at the end of our session. We have 2 invited speakers with us today. Dr. Jane Frankenberger is a professor of agricultural and biological engineering with Purdue University, and she serves as the water quality coordinator for the Purdue University Cooperative Extension Service. She's an author or co-author of more than 30 publications on watershed assessment and management, wellhead protection, land use impacts on water quality. Dr. Frankenberger's research focuses on watershed management, non-point source modeling, water and nitrate flux to subsurface drainage tiles, and she's an ideal person to help us with the topic of how food systems can impact our water quality. We also have Mr. Chris Baggott. Chris is an entrepreneur, speaker, author, and award-winning innovator across multiple industries. He started out in the technology sector as a co-founder of the email marketing platforms ExactTarget and Compendium. In 2011, Chris founded Tyner Pond Farm to provide Indiana consumers with sustainably produced beef, pork, chicken, and lamb raised on open pasture. He is also co-founder of Husk Foods, which is a grower and distributor of local non-GMO vegetables, a company called Cluster Truck, an internet-only ordering hub for local popular food truck items. And he's also co-founder of The Mug, a small farm-to-table restaurant in Greenfield, Indiana. Chris is a member of the Indiana Grown Commission, a government program to promote foods produced here in Indiana. And most recently, he was honored as the 2015 Trailblazer in Technology by TechPoint, Indiana's technology growth initiative. Those are our 2 speakers, but we're going to start with my colleague, Kim Ferraro, who is our Agriculture Policy Director and Senior Staff Attorney, giving us a framework on the setting the stage as far as farming in Indiana moving into becoming more of an industry. With that, Kim?
Last but not least, right? Okay. So I'm going to set the stage, as Indra mentioned, just to give you sort of the context of what our panelists are going to be talking about. For those of you who may be first timers to Greening the Statehouse, this will be new to you. For those of you who have been here in the past, you've heard us talk about industrial farming issues and the impact that they have on the environment. But it's really critical to understand where we are in order to really fully comprehend what sorts of steps we need to take to improve the situation. So here we go. We're going to talk about, and also put this in the context of your own food choice in addition to policy issues with respect to agriculture and our food systems. Okay, we did that. So here we go, transformation of farming into industry. Many of you might look at this beautiful picture of Tyner Pond Farms as a place where you think your food comes from, where most of your meat, dairy, and poultry products would come from. Or you might think of this rancher who was in the Super Bowl, 2 years ago for Dodge Ram as, sort of the iconic rancher out there growing our cattle. And you might think of this kind of guy as where the steaks that you buy when you go to the restaurant or the grocery store come from. But you would be wrong about that. These are really where these corporations, a handful of them, really control most of meat, dairy, and poultry production in the United States, and I'll put some statistics on that. It's 4 corporations that control 85% of beef production. That would be Tyson Foods, Cargill, Swift, and National Beef Packing Company. 2 corporations, Tyson and Smithfield, control more than half of pork production, and roughly 40% of milk is controlled by Dean Foods. And when I say controlled, I'm talking about a vertical integrated supply chain where you've got a large outside corporation that controls all processes of production, including production on the ground with what I would really call contract growers that own these, what we could colloquially refer to as a factory farm. For regulatory purposes, they're referred to as concentrated animal feeding operations. But now roughly 85% of the meat, poultry, and dairy products that you buy and that are produced in this country come from factory farms. And that's a football field size waste manure lagoon of hog waste that you see there. So in this system, this is what they look like on the inside. 70 billion farm animals are raised annually worldwide, more than 10 billion animals in the United States alone. Putting that into perspective, more than 6 million animals are killed for food every hour. And so to feed 70 billion animals, it takes a lot of land to grow the grain that these animals eat. And for this reason, this industrialized system is now the biggest user of land, 30% of arable land on the planet. It's the biggest contributor to habitat loss and species extinction, and now one of the top contributors to climate change, more than all of our transportation sources combined. And of course, 10 billion animals are 10 billion animals in the United States. That also produces a lot of waste. Here in Indiana, we have roughly 2,000 CAFOs that produce 14 times the amount of waste produced by our human population. And as Indra will talk to you about a little bit later, this obviously poses significant public health risks and water quality risks, which is really the focus of what our panel will be talking about today. This is a map of the number of CAFOs and where they are here in Indiana. And unfortunately, the state of current policy is such that only 3 of those are subject to federal regulation under the Clean Water Act. The rest of them remain largely subject to the state CFO rule, which does not in any way limit air emissions, odors, or where these facilities can be located. So policy is really lacking with respect to protecting all of us. So with that, we will turn it over to the panels and let you introduce them.
I'm pleased to be here, and well, I'll just go ahead with, as I was starting, I didn't know that context was going to quite be there. I'll talk about where what I'm talking about fits in with that context. So the panel is called Food and Water, and I think that's true. I've named this, nonetheless, Indiana Agriculture and Water Quality, because of the fact that our agriculture system, a lot of what it produces is not actually used as food. So I wanted to just, I talk about agriculture because it's used for a number of things. The agricultural system for decades has talked about food and feed. Now many of you may know that it goes back and forth, but most years the largest use of corn in the US is actually for fuel, the third F, ethanol. So we produce a lot here. Only a small part of which is actually eaten by humans. So I'm talking about what are the impacts, and then what Dr. Frank originally asked me to speak about was what can farmers do to do better. So I'm sort of going to do about half on each of those. And I do first want to say that there are different types of farms in Indiana. It's great we're going to hear about one. There are the small farms. Various specialty crops, vegetables, we call them specialty crops because they're relatively small, and there is livestock. And so actually it's good that you saw an overview of the livestock industry because I'm actually not going to talk about that so much. So I work with Purdue Extension. So a lot of what I do is go out and educate the agricultural community and working with them to improve methods, understand methods better. And one of the things I think that's really great is how much Purdue Extension recently has embraced the fact that there is a diverse agriculture in Indiana. Some of you may know, sort of in past decades, when I started 20 years ago, there was really much more an emphasis just on one type. And that is the one type that occupies an overwhelming majority of the land. And that's corn and soybeans. So livestock are important, but really most of us probably drove past mostly corn and soybean fields as we drove here. I came from the northwest, that's what you passed. From the northeast, you would have seen that. From the southeast, you would have seen that. Only I was thinking the southwest, you probably did not drive by so many corn and soybean fields. But really, this is the overwhelming product that our agriculture has. And so therefore, most of the water quality impact, the largest water quality impact, although it may not be obvious, but it really is from our corn and soybean systems. The livestock industry does have very strong impacts at a local level, and many of you may have experienced those. And there are a lot of impacts beyond water. The climate change, I think, is really important to bring up with livestock. But as far as at the scale of nutrients that leave our communities, especially that leave our state, it really is the corn and soybean fields. So that's what I like to remind our agricultural community about. And sometimes it's surprising because we see beautiful cornfields. Okay, they're harvested now, so you see sort of empty cornfields, but you look out, the sky is blue, the sun is shining, and you really think, how can this be affecting water quality? So I always have to remind people, it affects water quality when it rains, right? And if you drive around when it is raining, you will see the impacts. The first thing that many people think is the main impact is soil erosion, and it certainly is an impact, has been addressed for decades. Our conservation practices have been very focused on addressing soil erosion, and a lot of the soil erosion impacts have been addressed. There's something called conservation compliance that focuses on soil erosion impacts. Where we need to think today is what's happening below the ground. This is what's harder to see in much of the state. You can't see it at all, but there's a huge impact from our typical agricultural systems coming through our subsurface or tile drainage, as we commonly refer to it. You may see it when it comes out on the other part of the drainage infrastructure that is so important in our system, in the ditches or the surface drainage part. And that's where our water quality is really being affected by Indiana agriculture on an enormous scale. Subsurface drains underlay currently at least half. There isn't a good source of statistics here, but it certainly is most of the most highly productive farms and continues to be installed. You've probably driven by where more tile drains are being installed. So they've been there for 50 years, but by no means, or 100 years, by no means going down. For those of you who haven't seen just after it's installed, this is what a typical farm would look like from the air. Now, there's a very good reason that we have so much tile drainage, as you saw, because it rains. And so the tile drains are there because they lead to increased yields through a number of processes. It helps farmers get out earlier. It gives aeration to the crops. On the benefit side, as far as the environment, they do lead to decreased surface runoff and soil erosion and all the pollutants that go on the surface. So reminder, we do need the drainage. Really, it would be hard to farm in most of Indiana, or in a lot of Indiana, without the drainage. But there are unintended effects. And the first one is that there's a lot of nitrate coming out. This is very well established. The nitrate is the main cause of hypoxia in the Gulf of Mexico. All the maps that would show where the source of the nitrate is that's going to the Gulf, or you may know it as the dead zone. We tend to say hypoxia, but anyway, it's very low oxygen where fish and shrimp can't live. But we're right at the heart of where most of the nitrate is coming from. Us and the other I states, Iowa and Illinois, we work a lot together. But this is a very strong impact of Indiana's agricultural system on water, albeit a ways downstream. The other unintended impact of tile drainage that's just becoming very much more known, is really in the news since 2014, is the phosphorus that's going through the tile drains. This used to be practically ignored. It didn't look like where phosphorus was coming. Phosphorus does move over the land. A lot of it goes on the land like the left, but it's been shown more and more that it's also coming through the tile drains. Phosphorus, like nitrogen, has a very devastating impact downstream. Nitrogen is primarily the limiting nutrient in saltwater systems, so that's why we talk about it for like the Gulf of Mexico. But phosphorus is the limiting nutrient in all of our freshwater lakes. And so that could be local Indiana lakes, and certainly I'm sure many of you live on lakes or love lakes and have seen the impact of phosphorus. But I think Lake Erie in 2014, to me, is one of the most catastrophic events. I can't believe that this hasn't just been talked about constantly ever since then, when 500,000 people woke up and were unable to drink the water in the United States in 2014. I don't think anyone would expect that this could happen. Maybe in a developing country, maybe somewhere else, but in the US, right in the heart of the Midwest, the cause is the phosphorus causes the algae to grow. The algae creates a toxin. These are toxic algae, and it's something, it's more toxic than cyanide, I'm told. This is not my field, but really people were very strongly warned to not drink the water. The glass on the right is not what their water actually looked like. That was what it looked like in the lake, but after treatment it looks clear, but the toxin is there. And so suddenly all these people woke up, couldn't make a cup of coffee, couldn't feed their kids, and really I think that needed to raise this issue of looking at phosphorus and the impacts of our agricultural system on water to a new level. So that's my very quick, because it's not a very long presentation here, my very quick overview of the impacts of our water system. I do want to add that there isn't a lot of scientific disagreement here that I could think of. I think you could go to anyone who studies the agricultural system and say, yes, these are the impacts, this is true. Obviously, though, there's great disagreement on what should be done about it. And here's where I'm just going to step back into my Purdue Extension role. I just saw our Dean of Agriculture, Jay Ackridge, talking about this and how the policies that we choose depend on our values. So here the science is clear, but different people with different values will see different ways that it should be addressed. It can be addressed through providing, education, certainly we do that, providing incentives to farmers to do things differently. Our nation does that. There are very strong financial incentives to change things. There could be market kinds of things with water quality trading. People are trying to make that work, or there could be some kind of regulations. Currently, we don't have that on or much of it, not zero, but not very many regulations on our cropped agriculture. So the rest of the talk, I'm going to talk about can we do better, which is, I think, the original question. And so, yeah, great. How can we do better? So there are lots of practices out there. Some of you may have heard of cover crops. Our state is a leader, I'm told. I don't know the rest of the states, but it looks like we have some of the highest cover crop plantings here, but still tiny with respect to the amount of land that has just had corn or soybeans harvested from it. Cover crops will reduce the negative impact, which especially occurs all winter, by having living cover on the field. So farmers are incentivized. They can get about $30, $40 per acre from mostly the federal government. The state also provides various incentive programs to provide cover crops, but still it's a very small number that do that. What most scientists think, like me, well, I'll say I'm actually an engineer, which is, if you watch Big Bang Theory, that's a lower level. We think that we really need to address the drainage system to truly impact water quality because it's so ubiquitous. So there are various ways we can do this. I don't have time to talk about all the systems. One that I've been researching for quite a while is called drainage water management, where we put control structures into the drain lines, and that will hold the water back when drainage is not needed. As I ask farmers, do you need to have your land drained all winter? And if you really think about it, okay, you don't. They're out there draining all winter, but they don't need to. And so we do have a lot of research. This is still new enough that we can't state for sure what the impacts are, that we know they're beneficial. I work together with my counterparts across the Midwest, Minnesota, across. We have a big new project that's looking at these practices in common. We have students out doing research, and just wanted to throw a little research in there. The other thing that Purdue Extension does, of course, is bring farmers out to see these practices and think about how they might be able to implement them. Other practices you may be more familiar with, constructed wetlands, has so many benefits. It does reduce nitrogen and phosphorus through various mechanisms, and it's nice because there are many other benefits to it. One thing we're also thinking about is how we can modify the drainage ditches themselves. There's a lot of land there, and could the concept of wetlands, where you're saturating the soil and using it to process the nutrients, actually be at work in the ditches? So a new technology called the two-stage ditch. Nature Conservancy has really been a leader. Notre Dame has been working on it, and a lot of others, of putting these things in where the channel, the drainage function remains, but we can add some ecological function to the ditch. So when you see ditches like this, and this is, I don't know if they were standard, they still are pretty standard. There's plenty of ditches like this around the state. But what we're thinking of is a vision where the ditches would also have many ecological functions that could encourage denitrification and assimilation of the nutrients. And finally, the one that I'm really actively looking for right now is, as we're thinking about, could we just capture the drainage? Could we, like in a retention pond, we no longer, if we build a Walmart, we no longer think we can just discharge that right into the stream. Now it needs to be held in a pond. Could we hold the drainage back and then actually irrigate it back onto the land so that the nutrients that are now flowing out could be used by the crop, and that would be tremendously beneficial. There's lots of obstacles, and that's what we'll be addressing over the next several years. So that's some of the things that are going on at Purdue and elsewhere. So just to summarize again, there is a very strong and very significant impact on water quality. There are impacts from livestock, but there are impacts from the most common type of agriculture as well, which is our corn, soybean drained systems. There are also lots of conservation practices that exist. So the answer to my question is yes, we can do better, but we need much more widespread implementation of these improved practices to improve our water quality. Thanks.
Thank you, Jane. Just to bring the context, I think that I might have set Jane up a little bit inappropriately without tying a knot first. Certainly, she is correct that here in Indiana, the vast majority of our land use is used to grow corn and soybeans. But we also know that 50% of that does go to livestock. And so there is a connection between the grain and soybeans that we're growing and the livestock that we're feeding. So we've got to look at this as a whole food system when we're talking about water quality. And so that's why we've asked Chris Baggott to come.
My slides here, I don't know where they are.
Sure, we'll do that. Because he is going to talk to us about raising livestock responsibly in protection of the environment and water quality.
Okay, thank you very much. Gosh, am I the last one? Okay, so I think the context of me being here was to sort of explain how I got here and sort of what we're doing about a lot of the problems that we've talked about today. And in a little bit of context, my background has been in technology. I started a software company called ExactTarget, which we were very fortunate to take public and go to the New York Stock Exchange. I had another software company that we sold to Oracle. When we started ExactTarget in 2000, IT jobs contributed about $3 million in payroll to the state of Indiana. We're just about to go over $8 billion a year in payroll. And as I looked in food and agriculture, because then I became a hog farmer, it was really shocking to me that the IT business is significantly larger than the agriculture business in Indiana, as far as sales and payroll and things like that. And we pay no attention to government, and they pay no attention to us. And I was shocked at, learning in farming how much government is actually involved in our business. When we started ExactTarget, Mitch Daniels came to us and said, how can I help you boys? I don't understand what you're doing, but how can I help you? And if helping you is staying out of your way super happy to do that, right? And we really appreciated that because that was pretty much our answer. Leave us alone and we'll be fine and you'll be fine and it'll all be great. Agriculture is a lot different. But at any rate, I made the transition for a couple of reasons. And the first is I'm kind of a Republican, and we're in a Republican state, and I'm a free marketer. And, this is Adam Smith, and you can read the quote here, but, a lot of people in politics and Republicans frequently quote Adam Smith and talk about the free market, right? But the fact is, in food, in agriculture, it's not a free market at all. It's a monopoly. Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations because he was anti-monopoly. I was very fortunate to participate in the internet boom and the success and everything that's changed all of our lives. There would be no internet if the government hadn't broken up AT&T, right? The idea of AT&T's innovation was maybe a longer cord from your kitchen into your family room, right? So these monopolies need to be tackled and taken on. And for some reason, well, I'll tell you the reason why. Food is not that way. And I won't go through these, but it's now 3. Cargill is no longer involved in meat. JBS bought them out. So there's only 3 companies controlling all the meat in America. There are 4 companies that control all the grain in the world. And 1 company that controls all the seed, basically, in the United States, right? So these are clearly monopolies. But they wrap themselves in the flag of the family farmer and feeding the world. And I'll get to the family farmer second. First, I'm going to talk about feeding the world. So a big part of this, and because, I came out saying, somebody's got to fix this. Well, somebody, might as well be me, right? I think about beer, and we'd all be drinking Budweiser, and many of us might still enjoy a Budweiser every once in a while. But if it wasn't for Sam Adams, there'd be no Sun King, there'd be no Three Floyds, there'd be no brewery industry, and all those jobs and the great economic benefit that came from that, right? Sam Adams was the first company that stopped talking about chicks and pool tables and baseball and started talking about quality and ingredients and craftsmanship. Same with coffee. We'd have no coffee boom. I think there are 15 coffee roasters in the greater Indianapolis area. Without Starbucks, right? We'd be drinking Folgers still because Starbucks was the ones that educated us. Meat is a whole different thing, whole different animal, whole different thing because, because we all expect meat to be the same commodity all over the country, and there is no idea of quality or nuance or variance in any of those things. But one of the things I wanted to tackle first was the whole idea of feeding the world, right? These monopolies convince us that this is the only way to feed the world. Confinement animals, drugs, corn and soybeans. We have to suffer through the environmental consequences of these because it's the only way to feed the world. So we set out, our family, to go see the world. We started in Africa. I've been to Kenya twice. My daughters have actually been back to Ghana and Kenya 5 times. Since then, we've spent a lot of time with people. We've spent a lot of times on farms. I was very fortunate to go to our state government's trade mission to China this year, and then actually last week I just got back from my second trip to China, right? And just really wanted to understand, how are these people going to feed themselves, right? How are we going to feed them? Is that even possible? We went to Cuba this summer. I was very fortunate, got to go on an agricultural trip to Cuba and see how they do. We've also been to Ecuador, been to Peru. So we've been out there, right? And we've seen how's the world going to be fed. And I promise you, it's not going to be fed by factory farms and grocery stores, right? None of these countries have grocery stores. I show this internet because I just did a TED Talk, if you haven't had a chance to see that. This is China's online adoption of shopping, right? I use China because China has gone from wet markets, right? If you go into China, you can go into Beijing, you can walk into a building that looks like a Kroger in a giant apartment building that's brand spanking new. The doors will slide open and you'll walk into an open air market where meat hangs there. There's no refrigeration. When I was there with the state, everyone, oh, I can't believe this, and the people are like, you're crazy, right? We trust this. We see it, we know this guy, and if bad meat is sold here, this person will never sell meat again, right? It's got to be good. We know what it smells like. She's like, isn't it true in your country that you're allowed to, carbon monoxide in your meat to make it redder so you can sort of hide the date and you don't have to have country of origin anymore and, all these things. So they don't trust the grocery store. What they're doing is leaping over the grocery store to online, right? So the idea that we're going to have this factory logistics system that's going to feed the world through grocery stores, it's kind of ridiculous when you think about it. Which brings me now to Tyner Pond Farm. So we started the farm back in 2011. We were 85 acres, and the real issue was, okay, we've debunked the whole feed the world argument for this. You know, to your point, you want to feed the world, why don't we start with ethanol, right? Give up ethanol. You know, no, oh, wait, we've got plenty of corn. Okay, you can feed the world or you can't feed the world. I'm not sure what you're saying here, but what's the alternative for the farmer, right? And I really kind of always resent the small farm moniker, and no offense, but you know, it's an exclusive term, right? It's elitist. It means that if I'm farming 5,000 acres of corn and soybeans, I have no choice because I'm not going to be a small farm, right? So I kind of prefer alternative, right? What's the alternative to provide the meat to the United States, right? And that's what we're trying to set out to prove and solve at Tyner Pond Farm. Basically, we are taking corn and soybean land and putting it into pasture. Nothing sequesters carbon better, nothing holds water better. Deep-rooted grass that doesn't get plowed out, that rain's going to just fall in and get soaked into the ground, right? It's going to be healthier environment. 45% of our nutrition comes from natural forage for our hogs, for our chickens, and for our cattle, and we have a lot of 100% grass-fed cattle as well. So that's a heck of a lot less corn and soybeans that need to be grown. You go to these other countries, they're not growing corn and soybeans to feed their livestock either, right? There's lots of other crops besides corn and soybeans. We raise chickens on pasture. This year we raised over 50,000 chickens. And we also work with a lot of partner farms. And we do a lot of hogs. On our small acreage, which is right now about 900 acres, we started at 85 acres. We did about 3,000 hogs this year, right? With no corn growing on it, just running around on pasture, no lagoons, no houses. Thank you. And it works. And the fact is that if you go to buy our meat, which you can go up to Market District today in Carmel, which is our first grocery store, we're really, really competitive. You can buy our meat about the same price as you can buy anyone else's meat, right? Well, guess what? Those three companies, the monopolies, the inefficiencies of the factory system have caused their cost to go up, right? And they're monopolies. They can charge whatever they want. Hogs went from 50 cents 3 weeks ago to 30 cents a pound for live weight hogs in the commodity market, right? 20-cent difference for the farmer, but the price of meat still went up last week in the store, right? That's what a monopoly will do for you. So that's really all I wanted to show. This can be done without confinement farms. We can run scalable on the same amount of acres and feed everybody and make the farmers a lot more money. Our business is online. People order from us, tynerpondfarm.com. We pack orders and we deliver them in vans and vehicles. This is Connie Lawson, Secretary of State, came to visit us. A few stats about the farm. Again, started at 85 acres, now we're at 900 acres. In 2011, we had no partner farmers, it was just us. Now we run 900 acres ourselves. We have 14 farmers employed by us, and we're working with 11 other farms, right? So farmers are starting to come to us. Guys who are growing corn and soybeans and getting squeezed are like, what can I do? What can I do? Well, do you have 10 acres of woods? Great, here's 100 hogs. Go throw them out there, feed them out, and bring them back to us, and we'll buy them from you, So we've got a lot of folks doing that, a lot of folks growing non-GMO. We're very strict about our grain growers. We make sure that they have big buffers along the road. One of the things to save water in cropland is stop cutting down trees. But you go out to Hancock County right now, everybody's cutting down all those trees along the road. So all that water flows right off, right down the road, right into the creeks. It's terrible. We directly or indirectly employ over 100 people. That includes our processors, our drivers, our partner farmers, our marketers, people who build our website. This is big economic impact, right? There's 15 million farm acres in Indiana. If we converted just a few of those, let's say we did 500,000 acres doing it this way, what good that would be and the economic impact of all these jobs. These are good jobs. I think that's the end. That's all I wanted to say. So anyway, thanks very much. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I have one more thing. Sorry. I forgot. It's my punchline. This just happened, right? Ohio, right? So nobody pays attention to these monopolies until it's marijuana, apparently. In Ohio. But Ohio did a brilliant thing with, I think, ridiculously unintended consequences that are going to be good for all of us. They passed the first constitutional ban on constitutionalizing monopolies, right? Right? So this is going to have a lot of ramifications. People don't understand this, but I really believe this is important because all of these food companies are monopolies, right? So if now you're going to put in state constitutions about the right of these monopolies but not those monopolies. So anyway, something for us to think about and take a lesson from Ohio. Thanks very much.
Well, a big thank you to Jane and to Chris for talking about how our food system is connected to water and the steps, very practical steps that can be taken that have a beneficial impact and promote improved water quality. I work on environmental health. That's my profession. And while I see every environmental issue as a health issue, it's hard to think of any environmental issue more directly linked to our health than our water quality. Both drinking water, as Jane pointed out, with the drinking water stoppage in Lake Erie, the generation of toxigenic algae from overgrowth due to nutrient pollution, the contamination that can happen when manure is handled inappropriately and we wind up with a risk for infectious diseases. With those statements on linking the water quality issue to health, I'd like to hand this back to Kim to help all of us with some concrete steps that we can take to make a difference for Indiana's water, both through advocating when it comes to Indiana policy, but also in our own choices. So one more time with the slides, and then back to Kim.
Okay, so with every panel today, we've tried to tie this into specific policies that we expect to see this legislative session. And I think it would be important, two things important to understand before we get into the policy discussion is a really great point that Chris made about, and Jane, about the different types of farms. And I know he took issue with the idea of small farmer. We probably should come up with a different term. Alternative sounds great. But unfortunately, for policy purposes, these large corporate monopolies that control food production are treated like traditional or alternative farmers for purposes of regulation. And so clearly that's problematic when you think about the tremendous impact that confined animal feeding operations or even industrial commodity crops are having without any sort of regulation because they're being treated as if they're small farmers or alternative farmers. And so, you know, we've got to recognize the difference between an industry and a traditional farm. And that was really sort of the point of laying the context for all of this. So let's talk about what we expect to see this coming legislative session. I'm really glad you used the Ohio example about putting a constitutional right that protects a monopoly. Well, we certainly saw that last year with our an initiative to amend our state constitution to provide a fundamental right to farm. And you can see the language of that from last year. It reads, "The right of the people of Indiana to engage in diverse farming and ranching practices is guaranteed by the Constitution. The General Assembly may not pass a law that unreasonably abridges the rights of farmers and ranchers to employ or refuse to employ effective agricultural technology in livestock production and ranching practices." That sounds beautifully benign, but it is really problematic because, you know, if you're a policy wonk or a lawyer like I am, language means something. And so what is an effective agricultural technology practice? Well, the industry would say that that would be a confined animal feeding operation or a large commodity crop or whatever it is that they define it to be. And so now we have enshrined the right to do that in our state constitution, thereby really limiting the ability of state regulators to impose new safeguards. And I think Senator Kreider was very wise to bring that up in his talk and to point that out, that he came out in opposition to that for very good reason. So we expect to see that. We defeated it last year with your help. We expect to see it again. We're going to need your help again to defeat that if it comes up again. The other thing that we expect to see this year as a bad policy is an effort to strip away the ability of local boards of zoning appeals, plan commissions, county commissioners, local governments to regulate confined animal feeding operations and where they can locate. And that's really problematic if you consider that, just go on IDEM's website, this is the list of things they do not regulate under the state CFO or CAFO rule. They don't regulate property values, they don't regulate public road conditions, which we know from the increase in semi-trucks to take animals in and out is really problematic for local communities. And in bold, they do not regulate the place where CAFOs can locate, disposal of dead animals, which is regulated by the Board of Animal Health, but IDEM doesn't do it. Groundwater use, traffic, odors, and vectors. Well, these are the huge problems for local communities, people suffering. We get calls all the time from folks who are suffering by tremendous odors and air emissions and groundwater problems associated with confined animal feeding operations. So stripping local control of a county government to pass an ordinance that could help address that policy gap is really important to maintain. So if you get an action alert from us this year saying, you know, contact your legislator, contact these the ag committee members because they're trying to strip local control, please do it. This is really important. And then some good policies that we hope to see, which would do what Chris is suggesting, which would be to incentivize and grow our local food economy. We hope to see a renewed effort to do that again this session. Two bills, I believe, were brought last session. They were defeated. They didn't go anywhere. They weren't defeated. But we need to get behind that instead of being, you know, against it. We need to be for incentivizing the infrastructure that's needed and the financial incentives to help grow that economy. So with that, I think we can open it up to a few questions. Do we have time?
So the question was about the ultimate limit on phosphate fertilizer. This is a non-renewable resource. We don't hear about it, surprisingly, as much as other things like peak oil, but there are a few people who talk about things like peak phosphorus because it's very much as limited. So it's yet another reason. I mean, it's just like everything, it's hard for people to plan far enough ahead. Currently, there's plenty of it. Letting it be released into the environment is cheaper than conserving it, which is the reason pollution usually happens, right? So somehow it hasn't risen to a price level that makes people want to protect it more. But phosphorus is a limited resource. You know, they keep finding new deposits, just like with fossil fuel. It's in the Western Sahara, one of the very unstable parts of northwestern Africa that they've most recently found some. But ultimately, we will run out of phosphorus, and that's certainly a thing. When we look at sustainability, it's one of many reasons that our current system is not particularly sustainable. Thank you.
Actually, Kim, I had a question related to both what you and Jane talked about. Would the constitutional right to farm, if that were passed, would that also interfere with our ability to deal with nutrient problems that Jane was talking about?
This is so fun. Yes, short answer. It would. Because right now, any sort of stormwater runoff into a ditch from a farm field is exempt from the Clean Water Act. So if we were to try to address that policy gap through new regulation with a constitutional right to farm, which obviously the industry would be arguing that their ability to apply fertilizer is a common industry practice that they have a constitutional right to do, it would be very difficult to control that and pass safeguards to limit it.
But I was just thinking that I should follow up on the previous question, that our nitrogen fertilizer is not limited because it's coming from the air, right? So nitrogen fertilizer is processed through energy. So it's just a question of using energy. It's another fossil fuel user, and we can have all the nitrogen we want that way. So the nitrogen fertilizer really came into being around World War II, and once they figured out how to do that economically and make a lot of nitrogen, it shot up the amount that was used until about 1980. Now, it hasn't risen since 1980, and a lot of people will want to point that out. Look, it's staying the same. So, but yet, the amounts that are leaving are growing. So why is it growing? And that's where a lot of people have come around to the fact that it's our modified hydrology that we need to start thinking about. So our nitrogen expert at Purdue would say that yes, there are some opportunities to apply less nitrogen. For example, the way they do their recommendations now is on the basis of, there's the amount that would give you the highest yield, but they really strongly discourage that. There's an amount that instead gives you the highest profit, and it's different than the highest yield because there are costs to nitrogen. But that is always the continued education problem, to convince people that in fact the economically optimum nitrogen rate is the one to use rather than the agronomically optimum or the highest yield. So the nitrogen rates could come down. With phosphorus, it does not appear that the rate overall, when you divide the amount of phosphorus that's going on by the amount of phosphorus that's being harvested in the crops, because that's where these things go, right? We want the nutrients to be used, they grow through the crop, and I mean, if you want corn and soybeans, it gets harvested in the crop then. And so the phosphorus is not necessarily over-applied, but we have a lot of local areas where there's been way too much in the past. This is a strong impact of the livestock operations, confined or not confined, because of the balance in manure application. So it's, there often are places where manure is applied at much too high a rate, and therefore there are phosphorus excesses. So overall, there may be too much phosphorus and nitrogen applied, but it's especially applied in the wrong places and in the wrong way, and it's the system itself that is the problem. And so I guess, and maybe I can close by just saying this, there's a lot of things to throw out. It's not farmers, it's not bad farmers who are doing things poorly, it's the corn, soybean drained system that's the problem. Corn is inherently a leaky crop. To apply the amount to get the benefit of yield, it's almost always going to lose some nitrogen. So the solutions that we need to look through, as well as looking at our modified hydrology, is also diversifying the landscape. So the more we can turn to cover crops, pasture systems, anything that keeps crops growing throughout the year, these are probably the things we most need to change instead or in addition to changing the nitrogen rates. Is that too long? Sorry.
No, and I'm afraid we actually have to wrap up right there. I wanted to thank Chris and Jane again for bringing your comments to us today. Thank you.
Okay, well, I have the honors of providing some brief concluding remarks. So it will be three topics: some reminders, gratitude, and impact. Those will be the three final comments, and then we'll adjourn for the day. So in terms of reminders, everyone, as I mentioned, has postcards on your table, and please fill it out. This is a fantastic, tangible way to make a difference. I think, kind of in homage of our great last panel on ag, I would encourage you to consider writing a postcard to your state representative or your state senator in opposition to the Right to Farm constitutional amendment, which we call Right to Harm, because of the great damage it would do to small farmers and other people in rural Indiana. That would be one recommendation for how you could use your postcards. Leave them here. We'll mail them for you. We realize that we inadvertently put a little bit less stamps than we needed to. So please be sure to put your return address on it. And the beauty of that is not only will you have a legislative aide that works for a state rep or state senator reply to you, but again, it will show that there is a statewide movement for environmental action. I also want to highlight again how critical it is for you to speak up against the Congressional Review Act, with a vote taking place as early as Monday, possibly by Wednesday. You could do that by signing petitions at the Sierra Club booth, or you could go to act.hecweb.org, where we have a petition online that you can just speedily send to Senator Donnelly saying, please do not support this measure. Third, the Sierra Club is going to be hosting a meeting for those who want to continue the conversation on energy issues. It's going to be in room 0013, and Matt Skaya is outside and going to direct people to where that room is. It's basically this way and then downstairs. It's so important. Fourth, it's so important that we hear from you what you loved about the event, what you could have thought could have been improved. So please fill out those surveys that you've received as well. Gratitude. You know, one shout out that I hadn't given to is the University of Indianapolis, which was so generous in giving us this space. As I mentioned before, record-breaking number of nonprofit partners, record-breaking number of green businesses in support of this shared movement building that is the Greening the Statehouse. So much gratitude to our many, many sponsors. Much gratitude again to our staff, the wonderful work that everyone does, not just in the run-up to this event, but every day, the dedication, the heart, the intelligence. I love you guys. Thank you. And of course to you all, and now I'll pivot to the final point about impact. I like to say, for those who've been repeat visitors to Greening the Statehouse, that I really want you to come away with this not feeling like, just so you know what, I learned a lot. Thank you very much. I'm so glad we attended. I want you to say, I was inspired. That I am ready to be an advocate day in and day out for a different type of vision of the world. So in another, but much more abbreviated experiment, just say after me, citizens like me, all right? I'm gonna pose 4 questions and I'd like you to say, citizens like me. Who helped abolish slavery? Who helped secure the right to vote for women? Citizens like me. Who helped end illegal discrimination against African Americans? Citizens like me. Who will lead the battle against climate change? Citizens like me. However hard it has been and will be, we will win. Woo! Thank you.